Before we get started, I want to talk about today's sponsor, the House of Fraud. The House of Fraud was started to be the best online community for fraud fighters to learn and grow together. With 7 original series, micro master classes, a huge job board, and obviously networking opportunities, the House of Fraud is a safe place to discuss the problems you're facing today without having a million vendors asking you to please DM me because we can solve this problem for you. The House of Fraud also just launched a brand new public-facing original series called This Week in the House of Fraud, where Brian and I discuss the last week's hottest topics so you know what you're missing out on. If you're tired of being left out, please visit www.thehouseoffraud.com to learn about how to get your very own membership. I'll see you in there. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Fraud Boxer. I got the man, the myth, the legend, Alexander Hall is back again. How are you doing today?
Rocking it out, man. We're doing good. Up in Arizona though, man. I'm not too thrilled about that.
You're gonna want to be thinking about summer plans that aren't in Arizona, maybe book some gigs in a little cooler climate somewhere. Maybe hit up Montana, something,
That'd be good. I'll book a virtual
Have you been out there?
webinar in Montana. No, never.
Bro, Big Sky Country is awesome. Now, I could live there, but it's very nice to visit. It's very pricey because that's where all the billionaires bought ranches to hide all their money. That's why you see a lot of Lamborghinis running around with Montana plates, trying to dodge taxes for states like mine. But, Montana, you got to get out there, though. You got to get out there. You got to do a Yellowstone trip at some point. Take the little one out to Yellowstone. You'll have a good time. You'll see that circumference of an actual moose. You can see that there.
I did just go to North Carolina. I was back on what was it, May? I was in North Carolina. Man, that was the most beautiful skies, the most beautiful countryside, the most beautiful landscape I've ever seen. So Montana's anything like that, I look forward to.
I've never been, well, maybe I have. No, I've never really, in my adult life at least, I've never been to North Carolina. What were you doing out there?
I was speaking at Transform Finance. Funny story. I did my solo piece, which was awesome. Went over really well. That was cool. But then I got called in to do a panel, and it turns out that I stepped in when the SVP of fraud for Wells Fargo wasn't able to do it. There was some scheduling conflict, whatever it was. So when he dropped off the panel, they came up to me. Can you step in on this panel? I said, sure, but what are we talking about? Went with Brent Whittington. Went over the context and the stories, content. And we got 2 rounds of applause. So it went over well. Did much.
Isn't that great? I'm finally to the point in my career where I could pretty much jump on stage on almost anything. There's certain things that I don't do, but for the most part, even when I was in Singapore with Darwinium in October of last year, some of the visa folks were like, hey, would you mind jumping up on a panel about alerts and early warnings with us? And I was like, sure, why not? I'm talking an hour before and just got up there, filled time, crushed it. I think usually these days I'm winding up at most conferences on some sort of secondary panel that I wasn't initially planned. Even at the most recent MRC, I wasn't planned to be up there, but while we were there, they're like, hey, can you hop up and do a couple minutes? And I was like, sure, why not? So that was a good time.
When you know how to do it, you do it, and you're good at what you do, man.
Thank you for that. And so are you. And that's why we have you here today to talk about some of the stuff that you do, some of the stuff that you did, and some of the stuff that we're seeing as it specifically relates to identity right these days. And that identity isn't holding up a driver's license and turning your head sideways because that stuff sucks, but talking about where we're seeing the world of synthetic identities, creating new identities out of thin air, and all of that fun stuff. So shall we?
Let's do it, man.
So when I say the word identity, what does it mean to you? And in your own words, where does your mind immediately go to? I think that's kind of a cool way to start this one, since we're kind of flying. We got notes, but we're kind of going by the seat of our pants at the same time here.
Perfect. Identity to me means the mother of all. That's simply what it is. If you think about a fraudster leveraging identity information, they can go and establish a new credit card. Merchants aren't going to see chargebacks for fraudulent transactions. Is it even a fraudulent transaction when a fraudster establishes a new credit card and goes and uses Additionally, when you leverage identity information, it propagates throughout the entire market. Multi-system exploit, which is what I specialized when I was on the other side. Um, Additionally, through the lens of fraud prevention, I see it being a problem. And we'll get to that, but I see it being a problem that we're gonna have to make some significant changes in order to properly respond to the storm that's coming our way.
So let me tell you a story about something that happened to me recently that relates to this. There's a very nice restaurant in downtown Fullerton that I like to go to in the Friday evenings for their happy hour. It's a place called The Cellar. It's a fairly famous restaurant. It was built by some of the Imagineers from the Disneyland Pirates of the Caribbean. So it's like underground. It looks like you're in like a pirate ship, basically. But they're known for having really, really, really fancy cocktails. But they have legendary food too. Highly recommend it. Elizabeth Taylor used to eat there. John Wayne used to eat there. Very, very, very good food. But the cocktails is kind of like their big thing. So I like to go there on their happy hour and test out their like rotating cocktail menu. And I was talking to some of the people that were seated next to me at the bar top. One of the because it's probably a couple weeks ago, like 3 weeks ago, and the topic always comes up. What do you do for a living? You know, standard. What do you do? So I was talking kind of about fraud and fraud prevention, and the guy on the other side of me that I wasn't talking to jumped in on the conversation and had some questions about like how anonymous he might really be. And I kind of went on to this whole prevention, and the guy on the other side, what are like some of the best things he could do to like secure his identity and be anonymous? And of course, like freeze your credit, all those sorts of things. But I was telling him like how essentially easy it is to create a new person. Like without, you don't need a social security number to start creating a new person. You could just create a new person as long as you start doing it, signing up for some things in the right way, and then using that sort of information as proof to sign up for additional things. But it takes time. It takes a while to wait. And then using those sorts of baked in aged things to apply for new things, maybe apply for utility bill, maybe apply for a secured credit card. And then taking those sorts of things into eventually a long game is making it into the DMV to get an ID card, especially in states like California, where you don't have to be a full-time resident uh, to get a driver's license, to get an ID card. You don't have to have a social security number. You just have to have some sort of established identity, all the way to where you could basically create a person out of thin air. Now, it's not happening overnight, but it's easier than I think that most people think for this to happen. And I kind of blew the guy's mind. So what are your thoughts about that?
There's a lot to unpack, and everything that you said is accurate. So when I was on the other side, I did not participate in what we have collectively defined as synthetic ID fraud. I didn't participate in that. Take disparate credit card or disparate social security number, date of birth, address, name, pop it together and start to create this identity out of thin air. I did not participate in that. However, what I have historically defined as true identity theft, I'm learning I shouldn't call that. The research and the white pages that my friends over at Deduce have put out, they've kind of taken it upon themselves to label what super synthetics are. And I
Yeah.
feel that in order to properly label with the way that the industry is working, I should probably say that what I used to do was called super synthetic ID fraud, right? And so it's exactly what you described. When a piece of identity information came to me, it could be something as simple as an email address and name combination. And from there, I would use websites like SSNDOB or People Finder, been verified to start fleshing out the profile to see where they have accounts, where they have a presence. And then additionally, go over to these social media platforms or go over to these websites that I can order catalogs for in order to start associating new addresses.
Yeah.
And then from there, like you said, you go to the utility company. And over time, those report to the credit report. Over time, you get prepaid card or a secured card, something that reports up to the credit report. And now you have the fraudster has effectively injected information into all the way up to credit report. Well, people that are doing the highest level of due diligence on any B2C account creation, especially with FIs, they're leveraging, they feel that they're the highest and they feel that they're doing a good job leveraging bureau
Yeah.
data. And if the fraudster can inject information at the level, where else do they need?
Exactly.
So yeah, I resonate with that entirely. And there's an extra point that I would raise that isn't spoken about enough. We always talk about mule accounts as being predicated on the ability to manipulate somebody to come in and go make an account somewhere that we
Yeah,
then use for transaction. With the availability of compromised identity information and synthetic ID from, or the synthetic ID profile, mule accounts don't require coercion. Someone can just go create bank account, fintech account, all of these different accounts across the entire board, credit union accounts, across the board. And now they have
yeah,
control of 500,000 mule account. They didn't have to coerce someone every
yeah.
easily.
It's That's funny too, because like, I was at Charge Bash in Tampa last week with the Chargebacks 911 guys for their event, and, one of my old friends from my previous life, uh, lives in Tampa now, and he's a general manager of a retail store out there, and I was like, "Hey, let's grab lunch." I haven't seen him in like 12, 15 years. I'm like, "Let's grab lunch," and then grab lunch, and then he showed me his store, and we were like kinda walking around. I'm like, "Do you guys do buy online, pick up in store, BOPIS?" And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, we do." He's like, "We don't get a lot of it." I'm like, "How much fraud do you get to that? Like, how much like how much are you checking to see if the person really is that person?" But it doesn't matter because like even if you start like the super basic level data, like first of all, it's easy enough just to create a fake ID. Like these retail employees, like not saying his store, but like the majority of retail employees, they really don't care at the end of the day. So if you have just a completely fake driver's license that matches the info, they're gonna let you go. But at the end of the day, like you really could create these fake mule accounts that aren't the real person, even if it's the mule, or even if it's you now coming and picking it up because you're not using your own ID, and you have all the relevant information to pick up this item that you just stole. And I think one of the things that's like that people need to think about in this that you and I talked about on the phone the other night was like it doesn't matter. There's not going to be a chargeback on this credit card because the idea is you create the synthetic identity, you get the credit, and then you just walk away from it. Like you're not using somebody else's credit. You're using no like a fake credit at the end of the day. So the merchant's going to get their money. The bank's going to be the one that's really going to get screwed at the end of the day on that, which an interesting shift if you really think about it, because so much like all of our merchant side lives are trying to stop regular carding fraud from happening. But what happens if it's stolen complete money? Like it's just a bunch of stolen bills. Does that make sense? Am I framing that?
Yeah, no, you're entirely right. And through my conversations with financial institutions, I've heard from people who are adamant about fraud prevention, but are not given the freedom to initiate new procedures and policies and new new technology stacks, all these different things. Their biggest gripe is the fact that identity theft and what has been seen so far isn't a big enough deal when you compare it to AML and you compare it to sanctions and you compare it to all of the rules that come down, the federal rules that come down. Identity theft isn't being as taken as seriously across the board as it should be.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I've been told this isn't some assumption, I've been told this, that people are just like, hey, if someone creates a new $20,000 card, if somebody establishes a $40,000 loan, and it ends up being whatever the charge off, now it's
Yeah.
done, and we move back to our AML work. You know,
Isn't that crazy? Because like, we spend our whole lives trying to build, you and I both, like build our own nice credit profiles so we can buy things. We're so meticulous and careful. And if we screw up and the banks know how to find us, they're going to come after us with all they got. And eventually, maybe if we never, ever, ever pay or they really can't like get blood from that turnip, they're going to write it off. But for like these fake ones, they'll just write it off, be like, oh, we're never going to get that, take a loss on on our profit anyway. So might as well write it down a little bit. But like, it's crazy to me that like how easy it is for them to do that when the shoe is finally on the other foot, if that makes sense.
we made
But
a mistake. We allowed this thing to go through. No one to chase. Don't chase. Charge off.
and that's I think like it's two parts that I want to go with this. And because we're having a fun part with like what the banks and we love banks, don't get us wrong. We love banks, everybody. But it's just I think I saw the Revolut put out, speaking of banks, put out that report the other day. And I recorded another episode of a different show yesterday actually about some of the numbers from that. And one of the numbers was credit card fraud losses, like merchant credit card fraud losses, have went from 71% of all like fraudulent activity losses down to 51% in the last year. So 2023, they dropped from, they used to be 71% of all losses were credit card fraud. And now it's down to 51% as the rise of other scams have happened. And I think like some of those things are going to be, obviously like romance scams, pig butchering scams, but like these Zelle scams where in October, the banks are going to have 50-50 liability to make the end users whole if there's fraud involved in that. So years ago, we had 3D Secure where the issuers started to take ownership of some of the fraud. And they didn't like that. And now they have to take it with Zelle. And now they're doing these write downs as merchants have gotten better at preventing credit card fraud. The money, they're not going to go away. They're just not going to stop doing fraud. They need to find the money in other places. And why worry about taking $500 in a credit card fraud when you can create a fake identity, several of them at a time, just like you said, get $40,000 of credit, rip $40,000 worth of stuff in a couple of weeks, and then just walk away from it like it never even existed. Like the money available to in these sorts of scams is like exponential compared to what we're used to in our regular credit card fraud world. And that's what I'm happy that I'm not an FI in this because like it's the stakes are a lot higher than trying to like make sure people aren't stealing a bottle of vitamin C from my site, at the end of the day. What do you think?
So the stakes are higher when it comes to identity information. So when we think about the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years worth of fraud, we always likened fraud to being used with compromised payment instruments. So whether that's credit cards, debit cards, or checks. Well, all of that, every execution is just at one transaction. Now, checks is the exception because for a fraudster who effectively knows how to use checks, there are tactics, which I can go into detail if you'd like, but there are tactics that you can employ that make the value of a check worth what's the amount in the account. Credit cards and debit cards are also, but we have a lot of firepower and a lot of defenses centered
Yeah.
around the use of credit cards and debit cards. So it's
So
very unlikely that a card's going to drain the entire account. Yeah.
that's a really good point there because, especially like on like even like pulling out of ATMs, like there's limits like on how much you can do. Um, I don't do a whole lot of check fraud on this show. I don't think I've done any check fraud. And that's mostly my fault. Like I just don't think checks are sexy. And I don't
They're
I
incredibly sexy.
well, tell me why they're sexy. So then that way maybe you can change my mind and then I'll start using them more. Probably not though.
For everybody watching this, check fraud is not sexy. So let's play out a hypothetical. Some checks make it to my desk. What do I do? Okay. Well, the first most obvious approach is to wash it, use some brake cleaner, use all these different chemicals to wash off the stuff, and then
You're physically
rewrite it.
manipulating the check. You're physically manipulating the check. Got it.
That's entry level stuff. That's like the first round fraudster trying to figure out what to do. Let me take what's written on this check and get my value of it. So let me go clean off the ink and issue it to myself and reserve the signature and keep it for the same dollar amount and all that really basic elementary school level check fraud stuff. Up from there, we're going to duplicate that check. Okay, well, when you duplicate the check, what does it cost to get a hold of that? So in order to get a laserjet printer or a printer that has a high enough DPI to do scans, if you're concerned about maintaining the background of the check, $100. Goodwill is full of printers. So $100
Yeah.
maximum in order to get a very effective printer. Then you need Micker ink, $20, $30. You
Can
steal
I
it
get that on
from Office
Amazon?
Depot? I believe so. Yes.
Okay, keep going. I'm gonna live search this right now.
Then in addition to that, you get some check printing software, which comes in the box of VersaCheck and CheckSoft software and all of that different stuff. So now you can put the lines on it, but then you need the paper. You need the check paper. So that comes in business and personal. And again, that comes in the box of VersaCheck or CheckSoft, whatever it is. It comes in that box. So then you have blank check stock, you have Micker ink, you have the toner. If you want to preserve the background of the image, you scan it and then use a pirated version of Photoshop in order to clean it up and make sure that it looks good. printed on blank check stock, and now you are churning out counterfeit checks. They're exactly mimicking exactly what was intercepted. So now how do you use it? Depending on the institution that's being used, the information on a check is enough to gain access to the transaction history of one of the accounts. I won't name the bank, but there was a particular bank that I watched for. And when I got one of those checks, I could call into their service, their phone access system, type in the account number, type in the billing zip, and I could get
Yeah.
access to the transaction history. Another way is through using the last four of a social security number. Also, when you call into a financial institution, it's possible to access by typing in the social security number, then typing in the billing zip or whatever it might be. There's multiple combinations, but for me, it typically boils down to account number, last four, billing zip, and then the PIN number. I never messed with the PIN number. That was too much work. From there,
Yeah.
I've intercepted a check, which implies that this person spends money or this business spends money using checks. If I have access to the transaction history, I can mimic their spending behaviors with their checks. If it's a business, they send out a lot of checks. I'll just match that behavior over and over and over. Now, there's that. In addition to that, this is where identity information and stolen checks come together to become what I call third-party ATOs. So now, using a mule account that I've established on some fintech platform, I then use a stolen check that's associated with associated with a financial institution where I can access using the account number and the billing zip, get access to the transaction history. I can use the mule fintech account and try to link it to this established account where they
Okay.
ask for
Yeah.
what? They ask for the microtransactions, the microdeposits. Well, I just
Yeah.
got the transaction history.
Yeah. So then you could just enter that, then you're linked, and then you can see the whole available balance on that entire account. Because I know on all my linked accounts between my business accounts and my personal accounts, every one of them, no matter which direction I'm going, they show the balance of the other account. Uh, so I would know exactly how much. So did you target specifically businesses or personal, or did it matter? Because I've always would think that like business accounts would typically have a higher balance with less noticeability in moving the money.
Yeah, high volume, high value. I mean, for a person, when they send out $15,000 checks, if you mimic that behavior, you're coming up really well. Conversely, if you're targeting a personal account, they send out 4 checks a month, no more than 500, not really worth that much. So yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't target one over the other, but when it came to me, I knew which one was potentially more valuable. Yeah.
Got it. So this is where, like, I think about where the world's trying to go. And it's no secret, I'm a big passkey guy, big passkey guy. But I can't help but ever think like it's kind of a race to who can make the passkey first. Does that make sense? On any given account. So let's say I got grandma over here and she's got, $1 million left in her account, but she doesn't do any online banking. And I can establish my way into that online bank. And then I can establish some sort of passkey identity that's linked to me versus linked to her. Like essentially, like that bank account's mine forever. And those transactions will be fully authenticated, right?
That's why freezing credit profiles was so effective. I put your security measures in place. I froze your credit report.
So you would go in and then you'd freeze it on behalf of them. So it's because it is really a race of who can get there first on some of these identities, right? And especially when you're
Mhm.
creating a new one. But like if someone doesn't have established digital footprint, you created that for them to establish it for them. And then they're kind of I mean, lack of a better word, they're kind of your bitch at that point, right?
It's exclusive control, yes. Which is why I tell everyone, freeze your credit now. Everybody
Yeah.
listening to this, go freeze your credit now before a fraudster gets enough information to freeze your credit against you. Go freeze it. You can freeze it for free. Go freeze it.
That's always my number one, like, and anybody's like, "Well, what should I do to prevent fraud?" Like, I mean, it's never gonna be perfect. You're never gonna get it all, but the number one thing that you can do is freeze your credit. And when you're freezing your credit, don't use a password on there that you share across everything else, because
Yes.
then I could just go into your email account, recover your thing, and I'm back into your credit. Then I can unfreeze your credit using the same credentials. That one, like those 3 gotta be really, really different, everybody.
Yes. Yes. Good advice. Yeah, freeze it now, monitor your transactions, monitor your credit. Even if you have crappy credit, you don't want someone to get a hold of your identity, establish a mule account, and begin funneling stolen funds through it. Because then you're on the hook, or at least you're involved in the investigations until you prove that you're otherwise innocent. So
Yeah, you get
monitor your
that
credit,
wacky tax
monitor your
bill.
transactions.
IRS will find
Yeah,
out you received a whole bunch of money even though you didn't. But, I did
exactly.
see on that Revolut report, it said that this tax scams were dropping to less than 1%, which I think that the Revolut report might have been favoring, the UK a little bit and not so much the US, but I do know that more and more people in the US are using the PIN numbers for, filing their taxes because so many people have had their taxes, uh, filed
Filed on their behalf.
unnecessarily on their behalf. Yeah. Um, but, actually, who was I was talking to somebody. Oh, it was, Ariel on one of my other episodes. It happened to her years and years and years ago, and she says on that episode that she has to wait for the PIN number every year that the IRS has to send her. But
Ooh, that stinks.
so let's go back to the synthetic identities and some of the other stuff that we're seeing. So you have on this list something called throwaway information. So what does that mean? Like, what is throwaway information?
So that is the big difference between fraudsters leveraging payment information and fraudsters leveraging identity information historically. So when I first came across fraud, I figured out, okay, I need to get as much information as possible. How can I set up channels for these people that I interacted with to get me organic stuff? I never trusted the dark web. I never participated in that. I maintain the belief that if you're going to trust a thief to give you organic and valuable information, you're an idiot. Now, I was wrong because obviously there's plenty of successful people who operate primarily out of the dark web. I just didn't participate in it. So when I set up these channels to get a hold of information, what I ended up with was tens of thousands of pieces of information, whether it was identity information, payment information, documents, checks, whatever it was. I got a whole bunch of information. At one point, a couple of years before the height of my career, I decided, well, why don't I just go in and intentionally throw this credit card away, but at least start to troubleshoot, what's happening on the account, why it got denied, why it got, what the intention was to reverse engineer what verifications were in place on the back end. So if I call into customer service and I pose as Bob and I say, hey, I had this problem, can you help me? And here's this and this and this and this. Well, I know me posing as Bob was going to get thrown away, but at least I pulled out some information. Conversely, I would call in and say, hey, I'm trying to put this payment through and here's the card number. I know it isn't going to go through, but now I learned that they process payments over the phone. I'm learning by throwing away information. Now, that was all extremely valuable, leveraging payment details, leveraging, compromised payment information. With the amount of data breaches, mail theft, and otherwise, procuring all of this identity information, we are entering the realm of throwaway identity information, which can be used along with synthetics to go troubleshoot the verification processes because we're at a point where fraudsters are like, I have so much information and 10,000 of these profiles suck. They're not worth anything to me. Why don't I use them to experiment with the verifications processes of these
Super
various
interesting.
institutions?
Yeah, that's
We're
super
reaching that point.
interesting. That's why, like, we're, I'm always in a battle with our customer experience people, not at my company, but like historically, of like, because they want to make it easier when people get stuck to get out of any holes that they're in. And this is for every company. So, like, Fandango is a great example. Is I would have some reasons that would post in each transaction, like it would actually post to the transaction the reasons why it declined, and then I would have in parentheses, can tell the customer, can't tell the customer. So, like,
Nice.
I could be kind of helpful in situations where we could be helpful, but at the same time, I didn't want them to say, "Well, you tried 6 times, that's 1 time too many," and then now everybody knows they can try up to 5 times, that sort of thing. That was not the limit, everybody. That was It's very different. But that was
Take
just an
notes.
example. Yeah. And then the same thing with, like, when velocities would age off, like those sorts of things. Like, it's always a balance of what you wanna be helpful and you want good customers to be able to help themselves even and get out of, like, any sort of false positive jail. But at the same time, there's people testing the limits on the system to find out how far they can push it before they hit the wall. So then the next time they know exactly what to push up on the edge. And I think you see more people doing it with like bots specifically on like how fast they access things and how quickly they move through websites where you can see them going up and down. And then when they find a limit, then they hammer right up to the limit. But they have to be like, it's different in the bot world because you could try again and again and again. You might only be burning a couple IPs here and there, but you can just get another one of those. Especially for the websites that take IPv6 these days, like it's pretty much an infinite number of those. But they're it's always a it's always interesting to see the people that were trying to find out the limit or trying to, and you can tell like when a fraudster calls in, and I see some of the notes sometimes in some of the Zendesk tickets, I'm like, that's a fraudster. That's somebody trying to find where our line in the sand is so they know what to do differently next time in order to be successful. So that's interesting that the throwaway information thing, it's like it's validating. It's validating that I've seen that.
That's one thing that's gotten a lot of traction when I offer training to fraud analyst teams and customer service teams. They're the front line of defense. Well, customer service is the front line of defense. The other
Yeah.
ones are the fraud analysts are watching it as it comes in through the website. But I try to teach, and so we get a lot of interest whenever we talk about like the questions that would be asked. So so in the same situation, I'd call in and say, "Hey, my name's Bob. I have an account with you. Oh, I don't know what email I used, but my goldfish ate my phone, and now I got to go to New York for the funeral of the fish, and I got to do this and this and
Yeah.
this. Can you help me
Happens, bro.
reestablish access?"
Happens more often than you think.
And they tell you, "Well, in order to do that, we need this and this and this and this." And I say, "Okay, cool. I'll call you when I come back." Well, I posed as Bob. I called from a burner phone. Now I'm going to call back as Chris. "Hey, well, I called in and they said I needed this and this and this. Will this suffice? And I'm trying to get reestablish access to my account. Can we do this and this and this? Oh, we have to satisfy KBVs, whatever." Right. So we're getting all of that information, and it's unassociated to any account on your platform. So they get to
Yeah.
call in an infinite number of times, and it flies under the radar because no real request was made. And so in our systems, it's represented as nothing. Nothing took place. They called in, they asked questions, and they left. They didn't try to transact. They didn't try to access the account. They didn't try to reset access. They didn't actually try to do anything. They just asked us what they need to do it.
Yeah.
So it
There's
wasn't,
no
it's
notes
not
that even went
counted.
into any system at all because no account popped. There's nothing. Yeah.
Right. So there's no thwarted fraud attempt. There's no nothing. But the fraudster gained a lot of information. So that's one thing that I offer in my training is how to watch out for those types of attempts, because you can't tie it to an account. And it's not even being monitored with most of these organizations, especially the financial institutions. They just think they're being helpful. It's a weakness.
That's a super good one. Yeah, that one actually is blow my mind right there. Um, so we have a couple other things on here. Uh, Third party ATOs. What is that one? What do you think what does that mean?
So it's what I just described with the mule account on the fintech, where the fintech profile is accessing the established, I'm
Oh,
sorry, the
got it.
fintech account is accessing and taking over the established account. Now, you brought up the case of, well, what if I implement MFAs, OTPs, the password lists, or the password keys, and all those different things? What if I activate that? Doesn't matter. I'm not logging into your
Yeah.
account.
Yeah, because I can go in and initiate a transfer from another account without ever having to touch that account. That's a really good point. I think some of the banks are getting like on my new corporate account. I won't say what bank it's with. On the new corporate account, I was when I moved from a sole proprietorship to an S corp, I had to open a new bank account. You can't just change a business type for whatever bonkers reason. So I had to open a new bank account, but it wasn't letting me transfer between those two accounts the old way that I used to do it. They only let it go a
Hmm.
one-way street now. So they might, that particular bank, which I will say is a little more technical than the average bank. They're a little more modern. Uh, they might have caught on to that. So yeah,
So
but
this is the scary thing about all of this. If you go and you look at all of the, I don't know if I'm using the right word, but like mid-market financial institutions. So I have this list of all of the FIs registered up to like 300 of them. I have like a list of 300 FIs. Right there in the middle is a collection of financial institutions, credit unions and region banks and all these different subcategories that are important in some conversations, but not in mine. All of these mid-tier banks, they are increasing their digital viability, the ability to transact digitally, whether it's through an app or ACH or linking of third-party platforms, mobile check deposits, all of these different things. They're building out these robust things. And as I watch this happen in correlation with the availability of compromised I say, dude, I don't need to target tier one. I can just go straight to them.
Yeah.
I know they don't have the framework in place. They have the same functionality, these digital platforms, and moving into that and trying to extend their foot. They have the same functionality as the tier ones. Why do I need to go against Chase Bank when I can go to, I don't know if this is a real name, but like Twin Peaks Credit
I
Union
bet you it is.
in Montana? Why do I need to go target Chase? There's absolutely no reason. And so actually those are the three things that I spoke about when I spoke in London, New York, and North Carolina is what I'm calling mid-market financial institutions. There's a flood coming to them that they cannot possibly be prepared for. And there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, so everybody, if you're listening to this and you're a mid-market financial institution, give him a call because you're probably
All
gonna
right.
get ripped, and you're gonna have to write that down, like we talked about earlier. So what else? Like we have quite a list here, and we're not gonna be able to get to everything. But what else should we be talking about right now in this identity conversation?
I think that as fraudsters shift, as I shifted, I'm speaking from my personal experience, as I shifted from exploiting payment instruments and into leveraging identity information, this is where the idea of super synthetic IDs comes into play. Now, I guess we have to define that. Identity theft has its category, right? You copy and paste identity information and you attempt to make an application for a bank account or a credit card or whatever it is. That simple linear method of copy and paste is true identity theft, which I think really needs to be reevaluated. Then there's synthetics, which is a combination of disparate data points and making them something real when it isn't.
Yeah,
Super synthetics is taking, how would we classify this? Taking synthetics or real identities back to home base, manipulating and grooming the same way you would synthetics to a bigger, deeper, more robust level, and then finally executing. I have to say it that way because I only use real identities. I never
yeah,
played with what's categorized as synthetic IDs. I feel that the most pain is going to be felt when we realize as a global industry that the vast majority of our fraud prevention is predicated on tying a collection of
yeah,
transaction or a collection of accounts up to that identity. And when a fraudster can control what that identity looks like,
yeah,
what are we going to do?
yeah. I think like that's such a good point too, because like I have a lot of IDV and email validation people that have come on my show, and I love them all. Rob, love you. Verif, love those guys. Love everybody that does these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, Kata too. At the end of the day, when they use their tools to look up information, my teams are relying on what those companies are displaying to validate the information that's inputted on our website. And if that information can be manipulated, and it's scary how fast it can go. Like I can change one little thing. Like let's say when I started Fraudboxer years ago, I saw that email come through onto my identity in a matter of weeks. And even if I wasn't me and I didn't know how to go and look for that, and someone had just started using that on my behalf, but tying it to me, and then goes to try and make a purchase at like Best Buy, and then the Best Buy goes and brings up Ikata and says, "Oh, yeah, there's his email. It's on there. Like it's got to be him." When it's not really me. Like it's crazy how fast even our own tools can slide. And for me, like my head immediately always goes to like, I could start a whole new person. I could start Jordan Smith over here. And I could start today with my address at my house, this new name, my phone number, and a new email. Then I could go grab a Mint Mobile with that same address, same email, new email, the new phone. Then I have a new phone number now with that name. Then I could go take
Yep.
that utility bill, ride on into the DMV, get an ID, and then I could use that ID to go get a secured Visa card, put my $300 cash down on my own money, and then I have it. Then I could go take that and put that down, this credit, and this is over a period of time. This isn't like 3 days. But then I could go rent an apartment. Then I got a new address. Then Jordan Smith has an apartment. He has a new phone. He has a new address. He's basically started life over, you know? And then, oh my God, I lost my social security number. Here's all this information that I have. Can I please get a social security number as Jordan Smith, you know? And then Jordan Harris goes away. Jordan Smith is the new Jordan Harris.
Now, you brought up some really good points right there, man, because when I was doing this again with real identities, I didn't do the synthetic. The way that I would check my work. So what I'm calling this is injection, data injection. I knew this. So let's put this in context of time. When I was doing everything that I'm talking about coming down the line, I was doing it 10 years ago, 2 to 3 years before I stopped committing fraud altogether. So 10 years ago from today is when I was doing all of this that we're talking about.
Probably a little
Back
easier to
then,
do it even then.
easier, yes, but the timelines were different. And so the easier, it depends on what metrics you're measuring. And that's the point that I wanted to bring up.
Now data moves faster. Now data moves into these systems faster, I bet. Yeah.
Exactly. So I had to wait 30, 60, 90 days before I saw something represented in Ben Verified, White Pages, People Finder, Spokio, until I saw the information that I associated with this target identity represented in those platforms. It could have taken 90 days, right? And then whenever I got access to the credit report and I was injecting credit information to the credit report, that took 30 to 90 to 60, 120 days, whatever it was for it to be reported. Nowadays, since then, everyone has been competing to suck up every piece of information, make it report as quickly as possible. And so your projections would take it from a 90-day timeline down to probably executing everything within the 30 to 45-day mark. And that's doing one thing. Then consider that every work item that you just discussed, and this is a correlation between how I used to operate, how much time does it take to associate a new email to that name? 12 seconds? I made a new email. A new phone number. You put in a spammy text message thing, and now you associated the phone number to the email address. Okay, well, now a new address. So I go over to something that offers a catalog, and I order a catalog to this address. Each one of those items takes 30 seconds. How many 30 seconds are in a day? How many identities can be in cycle?
And you could just
over the
automate
course of
so
90
much
days?
of this. Like you could
And
so
now with
automate all
automation.
of this.
So
Yeah.
you're not looking at one identity over 90 days. Someone has 10,000 identities. They could be working on 100 starting on day 1 of January, 100 starting on day 1 of February, 100 working on day 1 of March, and it propagates throughout the entire system. And it could be, so this is another, oh my God, this is so huge, dude.
Yeah.
When it comes to identity information, it isn't the value of the account. With payment details, it's the value of the transaction, okay? Checks, it's the value of the account. What's in that account and how much of it can I get? Rarely do you get 100%, but how much can I get over what period of time? That's checks. That's cards, checks, cool. Identities, it's the value of the account, whichever bank account, but it's also the value of the other bank accounts you have. It's also the value of every credit card that you have. It's also the value of any loans that can be established. It's also the value of any credit cards that can be established. It is the value of everything that could possibly be financially tied to that identity. That's the value of identity theft, executed by someone who knows what the heck they're doing, not these copy and paste warriors that you see on the dark web. Somebody who knows what they're doing, there's a tremendous order of magnitudes difference between compromised credit cards I bought a TV
The compromised
and
identities.
leveraging an identity with 750 credit score.
Did, remember the old Family Guy where James Woods, like, shows up at Peter's house and assumes his identity and is, like, eating
Yes.
dinner, and he's like, "This is my house now, Peter, you can get out." And, like, then it goes to court and everything, and, like, James Woods just, like, literally takes over his whole life. Like, that's real shit, people. That really happens. Like, that stuff could I mean, they're probably not gonna show up at your house. They're probably just gonna take your life and become a second version of you doing bad shit. But, like, it can happen. So, freeze your credit scores, check your credit reports, be careful with your, where you're signing up and where you're putting things, because your information's out there. You can't stop that. That's already happened. Everybody that's listening to this, every single person, your identity has been compromised in some way at some point. So the only thing
Numerous
you can
times.
do is take steps to mitigate what's already happened to you. Wow. So that was a lot of fun. Let's I mean, we could talk about this all day, but let's talk about what do you have coming up? What have you been? I met PJ from About Fraud in person the other day.
Oh, nice.
Finally.
At the Swift
Yeah.
event, right?
Yeah, it was a really cool event. I'll put some of the photos over the top of this while we're talking right now. It was a really cool event. Funny story. So when I worked at Fandango, we used to go to happy hour at this bar at the end of our street called the Arsenal in West LA. It's on Pico and Bundy in West LA. And there was an awesome bartender, super cool dude, and he was always super kind to us. So for like 5 years, we'd go on there at least once a week. And I had been watching them during COVID and noticed that they had shut down. And this bar that Stift and About Fraud were having this event at uh, was a place called Rose Gold Saloon, and it used to be a place called the SF Saloon. It was the big San Francisco 49er bar on the west in West LA. So I was sad that that was gone. And then but the bar looked really cool. So we walked in. It's the same guy that owned the Arsenal. He bought that and had
Nice.
made it. He was like, we were both like, oh my God. He's like, "Are you here for the event?" Because it was a private closed. They closed it down on Monday and all that. So that was super cool. But food was excellent. So anybody that's listening to this that lives in West LA, go to the Rose Gold Saloon. Drinks look great. We did not have drinks there. Food was absolutely excellent. Get the ahi tuna bites. Amazing. Yeah, Rose Gold Saloon. What about you? So tell me more. Where else you been? How was London? Tell me about London.
London was amazing. Conversations were great. I got to meet up with Tony Sales from We Fight Fraud. If you guys don't know who he is, I highly recommend checking him out. Him and his team are doing some really, really good things centered around scams, both for businesses and for awareness throughout colleges and high schools, typical targets for mules.
That they did a big, huge video, and I'll link it in the description of this, but they did a synthetic identity video, both physical and digital. And it they end up, I mean,
Don't give it away.
spoiler alert, everybody.
No,
They
no, no, no.
they buy everything. So go watch it because it'll blow your mind. And it's a pretty short
It will.
video, but like I'll link that. So I mean that falls right into this. So yeah, you met him, you were hanging out with him. You had dinner with him, right?
Dinner with him, drinks with him. He went and showed me the street where Jack the Ripper operated.
That's cool.
I
That's
guess a
cool.
lot of it is still preserved. I don't think it's intentionally preserved, but it happens to be preserved. So that was some crazy ambiance there. So yeah, London was great. Then New York was awesome. Hang out with Bob from IPQS and several other people. That was really fun. North Carolina was great. Yeah. Update. I've made a massive pivot in my focus to support merchants directly, financial institutions as well. But I understand you guys have your hands tied with like compliance and AML investigations. So I'm letting you guys do what you need to do. But when it comes to merchants, I've started to offer these trainings that I mentioned earlier. Seeing a lot of really good response there. And then also, there's a lot of interest in phishing websites, which is not a specialty of
Super
mine. I won't
interesting.
claim that it is. But in my conversations, phishing websites seems to be really taking off. Seems
They
to be
are
a use
huge. My
case
my
that's always
mom my mom
yeah.
is always sending me links. Is this legit? Is this legit? Trying to buy stuff cheap. Phishing websites are, and it's always PayPal, and because you get so much information on PayPal, and you can drain the bank account.
Yeah. Yeah. It's insane. So, No, there's a lot happening. I get pulled in 1,000 different directions. I'm excited to I'll say it here, I'm doing an Ask Me Anything with Riskified on what date is this coming out?
Coming out in June, the first couple of weeks of June. I think it's already gonna happen, right?
Yeah, that'll already be done. So if you guys didn't see it, go check out the recording. But then in addition to that, earlier today I recorded podcast number 1 out of 7 with IntelliCheck, where we're talking
Okay.
about very expansive version of what we went
Check
over
fraud?
here today. You and I, yeah, check fraud, identity theft, demands on what the fraud industry, the fraud prevention industry is going to feel, the pressure they're going to feel. I'm really excited about that IntelliCheck. And then yeah, I guess the sky's the limit, bro.
Are you going to the, Ascend conference with Riskified in June?
I have an email that I haven't responded to.
You should do that.
Um,
Yeah,
okay.
you should.
I'll figure
It's
that
good.
out.
They always they put on really great events. Last year was in Nashville. I'm going this year. I'm actually gonna be doing I'm recording this show live on main stage. Uh, so that's gonna be fun. Yeah, we're gonna set up the whole little thing, get the microphones out. We're gonna record it live. Uh, yeah, you should go. You should tell them.
Bring me along for the ride. I'd love to record with you in person again.
Well, I'm doing their product people, so they could talk about
Mm,
like their new offerings in the space, kind of like you know,
okay.
what some of the stuff they're addressing as it relates to account
Stay
security,
focused.
actually. So yeah, but I'd love to have you on
Good.
there. But you should still come.
I'll work it out. I'll see what I can do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I just like I said at the beginning, I just got back from that Chargebacks 911. So, I mean, it's mostly for their partners, like some of the ISOs that they work with. But then there's of course me there. But it was really cool to see because I think a lot of people don't quite understand what like these some of these chargeback companies do that do chargeback fighting. They think that they just log in, respond to your chargebacks, and move on. But a lot of them do a lot of work that goes beyond that. And I think that it seems like they've spent a tremendous amount of time on how they respond based on bank by bank by bank by bank and the speed that they respond. And one of the cool things that I think is always great about using a service like Chargebacks 911. Now, I have used Chargebacks 911 in the past, and I had great success with them, like tremendous success. And I know like not a lot of people really talk about that, like that they've used them. I enjoyed using them, and they are really leveraging their automation on to get the speed of the responses, but also staying on top of the regulations and the changes that come with things like CE 3.0, for example, which I think there's still a lot of people that are confused by that. And they break how they do their responses based on industry by industry by industry to make sure that those responses are appropriate and then breaks it down by the different card brands and then how individual issuers that they know how they like certain things to be. So I think that people don't talk about their technology enough because they think they have human beings logging in and fighting chargebacks when that's not necessarily the case. So, yeah.
Love it. I think that's as deep as you could possibly go when it comes to it, because at some point, I've had this conversation before where if you classify based on issuer and then you attempt to increase your rates, you don't know who you're going to get from the issuing side. You don't know who you're going to get. You don't know who's handling the claim if it's not automated. And therefore, you have to classify on an issuer level, not only on a use case or network level. And I think that's a really important distinction to be made. Yeah, that's
So
interesting.
they were making a lot of they did a lot of role playing, little acting. I'll put some of the stuff up on here from that as well. But a lot of like role playing things where it was talking about how it's better to have a better understanding of the business before you start doing a product offering. When so many businesses in the space will be like, okay, you need our processing. We're just going to refund everything. And to try and beat the chargebacks, because like a lot of, I've seen it happen in the industry a lot is where, the alerts, the companies that provide mostly alerts are the ones that say like, just auto refund these alerts and then chargeback goes away. It's kind of the idea of them, but you'll see also chargeback companies just refund what they receive the chargeback to hack the win rate and say, I want it when all they did was just refund it. And it's not really winning. And that's kind of BS. So they were making fun of companies that do that and talking about how like you can't just refund everything and hope for and count that it's a win. Like you need to have a deep understanding of the business and the deep understanding of who their partners are, what they're selling, and what the complaints are, and then know how to properly respond to those. So Like, I'll give like, I will give Chargebacks 911 props because they got me out of a tight spot in the past. So, I like them, guys. Sorry, I like them.
Very good, man. Heck yeah. Well, I'm glad you had fun. I'm glad it was useful. And I look forward to seeing you at Ascend. I'll see if I can figure it out so I
Yeah.
can go.
Yeah, you better get in there. I wanna see it. We're gonna have a good time. Steve's coming with me. Yeah, it'll be good. Like, and it's at the Brooklyn Bridge Hotel. I've never been over in Brooklyn, so I've always been in Midtown, so, yeah. All right, buddy. Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for talking, IDs with us and synthetic IDs, and hopefully we didn't scare everybody when how easy it really is to have your whole life flipped upside down. But, I'll send all the links, to, like, some of your upcoming sessions, below. Those will probably be out, some of them by the time this one goes live. But, links to you, and if people wanna know more, merchants, if you wanna know more solution providers and fintechs that are listening to this, if you any of this resonates with you and you wanna know more, I'll put his contact info in the description so you can get a hold of him directly and you can guys can partner up and do your thing. So, yeah. Alexander Hall, everybody. Thanks again, man.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Jordan. You're the man.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Please don't forget to visit our sponsor, The House of Fraud, at www.thehouseoffraud.com to learn how to get your very own membership to get in the club. Don't forget to also subscribe to our brand new original series, This Week in the House of Fraud, available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and pretty much anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next week.